In the 1970s, the United States passed public health laws, including establishing the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. Many of the chemicals discovered and created in the previous decades, such as plastics, as well as insulating oils for use in engines and electronics, were by then found to be dangerous, contaminating the land, drinking water, our harbors and oceans, with real consequences. Residents surrounding the New Bedford harbor are still dealing with the impacts of that contamination. However, there is remarkable work going on by community organizations advocating for safe cleanup and responding to the social and environmental health impacts of the contamination. They are working to build truly resilient communities.
I love New Bedford. It's a great place to live. It's improving every year that I live here. It's growing and more people are moving here, and I'm excited about its future.
For over 2 decades, the Boston University Superfund Research Program has worked to understand the effects of chemical exposures found in and around the New Bedford Harbor Superfund site.
This is one of our old sites, one of our original sites, and it was put on what we call the National Priority List in 1985. In 1985, the site was listed. The first years of the project were spent really trying to get our arms around what the problem was here, the nature of and extent of the problem, and trying to figure out what we could do about it. And as time went by, we realized the problem was very large.
The EPA told me recently it's going to be probably going to be decades before you should be eating fish that you caught in the harbor.
The source of the problem we have in New Bedford is there was a group of electronics companies that manufactured capacitors and transformers in the New Bedford area. The two were known under various names. The one in the Upper Harbor on Belleville Avenue was known as Aerovox for much of its life. The one outside the hurricane barrier was Cornell Dubilier, which there's a company by that name still there. They do not use PCBs.
This is one of our most significant sites because it's costing the state and the EPA a significant amount of money. I wouldn't say it was the most expensive one in the state, but it's certainly the most expensive one that EPA and DEP are funding. So that's why, one reason that's very important, that we spend money to alleviate the risk that is involved in the contamination of New Bedford Harbor. Because the cleanup is basically underwater, it's tough to see any kind of change, but there has been significant shoreline changes. I think just to the general nature of the economy, that people are willing to buy houses along the shoreline. The original EPA in their process has to decide what a site's going to be used for. And their original thought when they did the record decision was, oh, they're going to be just industrialized places because that's what was there. All the mills were there, and a lot of New Bedford doesn't have residential for the most part along the shoreline. Well, that kind of changed, and they did have to change their cleanup number a bit to count for all the residents that are moving in to the mills. So it was a significant change that they hadn't anticipated.
The plans to clean up the harbor have they've been changed and amended 100 times. The plan in 1995 by the EPA to build a PCB incinerator right here in New Bedford to burn PCB waste was abandoned, and that would not have happened without the tireless work of Hands Across the River and other groups here in the city. And the EPA never would have agreed to dredge and dispose of the most contaminated harbor sediments off-site if it hadn't been for the activism of these local groups.
What the EPA has also done is they've done some mechanical dredging. And what that does is basically they take the contaminated material up out of the water, some of which could become airborne, put it on an open top scow like they're doing here, and take it over to the area where they choose to dispose of it, which in this case is the CAD cell, Confined Aquatic Disposal, which is just the EPA's term for an unlined burial hole.
After 2013, the work has accelerated quite a bit. In 2017, we did 9 times more dredging than we did in a typical year before the settlement took place. And because of that, we're hopeful that we can finish the majority of the work on this project in the next 5 years.
In other similar waterway cleanups around the country, the EPA has cleaned up PCBs to a level where people can fish and shellfish, and that's not going to happen here in New Bedford for the next generation of people who are growing up here and want to use the harbor. And it's still going to be cut off for those people in a way that the surrounding communities around New Bedford, places like Fairhaven, Mattapoisett, Dartmouth, aren't experiencing. Those places, people have a deep connection to the water, and that just won't be possible here in New Bedford.